Hey, what's up, you guys? This is Kellen from Killing for Company, and today I have another album review for you. I'm going to be talking about the fourth full length from Italian brutal death metal band Devangelic, their album entitled Zool. So Zool is the fourth full length, second release on Willowtip for Devangelic, and sees them moving towards something that is a bit more immersive within the sort of Sumerian mythology relative to their previous releases. So I just want to spend a little bit of time going back and talking about where they came from and why it's important to this record, because what I've seen a lot of is initial comparisons to a band like Nile, and while that's important, I think this band is best understood and this record is best understood going back a little bit and talking about brutal death metal. So Devangelic arrived in 2012 with a sound that is probably best described as a brutal death metal that had started at around the late 90s, early 2000s. We're talking about bands like California's Disgorge, the Turkish band Cenotaph, or Greece's Inveracity. It's a style of brutal death metal that I think the key feature is a relationship between the riffing style and the blast beat that seems to prioritize this sort of concussive effect. It's not one that is necessarily based on like the technicality of the playing as much as the pure aggression and impact that happens. So that is the place that we need to begin when we talk about the sound of Devangelic, because as they progress through their records, I think they make incremental steps towards what we arrive at with Zool. So their first release back in 2014, entitled Resurrection Denied, and the second follow-up, which will be key here, Phlegethon. Both of those were released on Comatose Records. But what Phlegethon introduced is a level of technical proficiency that, while still by no means should be described as tech death, started to introduce new influences from the era that I just previously mentioned. So we're talking still here late 90s, early 2000s, but instead of just thinking about Disgorge, we need to start thinking about Deeds of Flesh. Once we're talking about Cenotaph, probably another one that we need to bring to the table is Cryptopsy. And then finally we are allowed to introduce this sort of Nile comparison. So the Nile reference here, while yes, has to do with a level of blurring that technical and brutal death metal sound, I think Devangelic, after Phlegethon, they move from Comatose Records, move over to Willowtip, and start to completely immerse themselves in this idea of Sumerian mythology being the driving force behind their records, thematically, lyrically. But, and I say this as a major point of reference here, they are still first and foremost rooted in that kind of Disgorge, Inveracity, brutal death metal sound. So for me, I hear them first and foremost as like a slow progression through the years, whereas Nile, from the get, they already have this incredibly well-established identity, whereas Devangelic have moved through the years to arrive at something like Zool. So Phlegethon, last one on Comatose, move over to Willowtip Records in 2020, I believe, for Ursetu. Now, Ursetu is them sort of moving in and growing to this new identity. I don't think they are nearly as well versed in how they want to handle this Sumerian idea, mythology, and overall environmental or atmospheric contribution to their records. Zool release, they've started to incorporate a level of mid-pace groove that is far less connected to the likes of Suffocation or Devourment. But now I would say is probably best described as somewhere between Domination to Gateway of Annihilation era Morbid Angel. So the two singles from this record, the first one, Sirius Draconis Capricornus, and the second one, Odog Hul Incantation, both sound like they are pulled from that late 90s, early 2000s Morbid Angel era more than they do anything from Disgorge. One of my favorite moments is track number 6, Worship of the Black Flames. A way of how they close the song is probably the most noticeable factor for me, and it sort of culminates as it fades out. So that was a cool moment. I think if you want to be compared with a band like Nile, for better or worse, Devangelic are heading in the right direction, sort of meeting that standard. Where can we be critical, or how do I want to close this out? There's a lot that I love about this record. They've continued to develop as a band technically. They're doing a better job incorporating additional sort of instrumental influences, thematically and lyrically. The addition of this mid-pace Morbid Angel groove, I think also is a welcome addition to their sound. To me, it also feels, I have to say, like a slightly less realized, or maybe an element to their sound that is not yet completely reconciled. Meaning, I don't think their best riffs within this brutal death metal side of things, your Disgorge side, have been yet realized, and at the same time this world building Nile side to them is also, I think, unfulfilled. It does not, they are sort of operating within those two spaces, and when I end Zool, I still feel like they have yet to write a record that completely encapsulates both aspects of their identity. So Zool, in the end, is one of my favorite death metal records to come out this year. Hands down the most diverse and fully realized within the genre. As much as I may be critical of the band and where they're at, still thinking that there's room for them to grow and to capitalize on the sounds that they've introduced, I still can't give it a high recommendation enough. In my opinion, the best brutal death metal release in 2023. So for my call to arms here, I do want to shout out another brutal death metal release that is very much interested in being one of the more extreme things on the planet. I couldn't mention the Turkish band Cenotaph without bringing out another brutal death metal band from Turkey. So Molested Divinity has released their third full-length entitled The Primordial on New Standard Elite. It is a little bit, not a little bit, it is very much one of those bands that is trying to do something incredibly extreme, but they do it in a way that I think is still invested in the best of what the genre. For those who liked Cenotaph's work, and it's on New Standard Elite, so it's right in the spot that speaks to what brutal death metal is today. In terms of the best interpretation of it, classic Turkish death metal. If that sounds like your thing and you want something that does a little bit more bowel shaking than Devangelic, go check out Molested Divinity, The Primordial. All right, see you guys later. Bye.